Welcome to ENside Politics, the weekly podcast on how San Antonio politics really works. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro editor and columnist at the San Antonio Express-News. I'm joined today by City Hall reporter Molly Smith. And our special guest today is Joe Jones, president. Very special.
Wow,
very
special.
Indeed. President of the San Antonio Professional Firefighters Association, usually just known as the Fire Union.
Yes, sir.
You were elected in 2022. And what's your position with the fire department?
I'm a district chief in the San Antonio Fire Department.
Great. So I wanted to start off with a letter you wrote to your members on Wednesday relating to a Venezuelan gang called the Tren de Aragua.
Yes.
Aragua.
It's a tough one, right, Greg? It's tough.
It is tough.
My wife told me to just start calling it TDA, Joe.
Right. So we should say that San Antonio Police, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the FBI, Border Patrol, and Homeland Security raided a north central apartment complex called Palacia Apartment Homes early Saturday morning. They arrested 19 people, 16 of them Venezuelan, 4 of them members of TDA. Mm-hmm. You had brought this to light on Wednesday in a letter to your members. Tell us what the substance of that letter was.
It was basically watch your back. Uh-huh. We have what we felt was credible information from our paramedics and our firefighters who were making runs into some specific apartment complexes across the north side right there in that zone. Mm-hmm. We felt that it warranted notifying them. Mm-hmm. Because nobody was bothering to notify them. Right.
Part of your letter was criticism of the fire department leadership mm-hmm. and the city manager's office mm-hmm. For not really responding to your concerns.
Yes.
When did you start hearing these rumors, and when did you reach out to Eric Walsh, the city manager, his office?
So we first started hearing the rumors on Monday of last week.
Okay.
And there's kind of a verification process because you imagine that, right? You hear a lot of things, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to verify before you really engage, right? Because if you send every rumor downtown that you hear about, then it's constant rumor abatement. You can't really get the work done. So after contacting numerous firefighters and paramedics that work at these stations, we determined that what we were hearing was close enough to what they were being told directly.
And what were those rumors?
Well, the rumors were increase in gun violence in the area, presence of people who are kind of their presence is ominous, violent activities and behaviors. Especially surrounding some of these apartment complexes on the north side.
Right.
So we sent a request for information downtown, and I think it was 5 hours later, 6 hours later, we got a very neutral, muted response. And when the safety of firefighters and paramedics is on the line, that's number one from me. As the
safety concerns, walk us through what your concerns were. What could have happened, like in your view?
Well, Greg, anything can happen. We've been on scene before where situations can escalate, and they escalate rapidly. And if we don't have some kind of police presence, you don't really know what's going to happen because we're completely unarmed out there. San Antonio firefighters and paramedics don't carry sidearms. We don't carry weapons. We literally are there to help every single time. That's what we do. So we're talking about people who are going in unprepared, unknowing, and unarmed. Our uniforms
but aren't there cases? Aren't there cases in which you go in with a police escort?
Sometimes, absolutely.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, why wouldn't you request a police escort if you felt unsafe?
Okay, so if you don't know about the situation, you're not aware of it. You don't know to request it either. Okay. And there's been times in the past where the South Texas Fusion Center has notified us. We used to get consistent reports from the Fusion Center where, hey, whether it was BOLOs or whether it's, hey, firefighters and paramedics, be on the lookout. We have this person acting erratically in this area, might compromise your safety. Or, it would happen where, hey, on this particular engine, this individual tried to open the door, to the driver's area and get inside, possibly trying to steal it. Those kind of notices came out with regularity, and that stopped a few years ago. So in the absence of information coming from administration and official channels, we're left to look out for ourselves, unfortunately. And that was the situation here. Give you an example. Last year we had an engine company on the near northwest side who inexplicably got shot at. They were on a random medical scene, and 2 trucks pulled up and they started shooting at them. These are firefighters that they're shooting at. One got grazed on his left temple. We're talking millimeters difference, and we're having to do, a huge ceremony and, celebrate his life. We lost one of our young up and coming firefighters who had less than a year on the job, quit over the incident. His safety is more important than that. We don't have ballistic equipment. We don't have the vests and everything, the bulletproof vest, the knife-proof vest, whatever you want to call it. The only ballistic equipment that exists in the San Antonio Fire Department is outdated. It's not even, it's extended past its useful life. I think it timed out, and I think we purchased it in 2015. It timed out in 2020, and that's only for select and very few units across the city. So when you're going into a potentially dangerous environment, you can't even put a vest on for safety, right? Bulletproof vest or whatever you want to call it. We call it ballistic gear because we don't even have ballistic gear. So what we saw was a complete absence of information coming from official channels. So I felt compelled to, notify our firefighters and paramedics, because the reality is it's not just firefighters and paramedics at Fire Station 31, over there at Blanco and West Avenue, or Fire Station 17 on Jones Maltzberger just inside Loop 410. They're not the only ones responding to this area. Multiple units converge right there. We have 5 different districts that converge in that particular area of town. So you can have units from the northeast side, northwest side, the central district coming out. You can have special operations rolling in and out of that district. And the other reality is our firefighters and paramedics work across the city. So I'm the downtown district chief on the B shift, but I could be, working overtime or, have to work elsewhere, and it could be the southeast side or it could be the northwest side. So the reality is if one of our firefighters or one of our paramedics is working overtime or trading time into one of those stations and they're not aware of it, then they're potentially at a higher risk for, dangerous activity and behavior, because it also indicates to our firefighters and paramedics, specifically the officers, hey, keep your crew tighter knit, kind of like a 2 in, 2 out, always have somebody with you, because we have to go back and forth to the trucks for equipment, right? So it just changes our operations if you know that there's a heightened sense of danger.
Yeah. So you write the letter, send it out to 1,800 members on Wednesday, and by Thursday it's leaked to KSAT, and it's posted by the vice chair of the Bexar County Republican Party. I believe it was Friday morning.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was. And then we wrote about it on Friday. Is there any concern on your part that by writing that letter, which was subsequently made public, that you were interfering with the police investigation?
Absolutely, and I tried to stay ambiguous. And y'all two are professional writers. I am not a professional writer, right? So I tried to stay effectively ambiguous while still kind of identifying the area, because everybody in that whole surrounding area, not just those 2 stations, needed to know. So was compromising ongoing law enforcement operations a concern of mine? Absolutely. But in the back of my head, as a citizen of San Antonio, I live in San Antonio. I'm not one of those folks that commutes in from the surrounding communities. I live in San Antonio. And as a citizen of San Antonio, I would want to know. So there's also that avenue.
Yeah. Have you heard from back channels or maybe from the police department directly that the time, the timing of this is such that the raid happened,
how convenient.
Within 2 days of this becoming public. Is the timing of that raid, do you think, the result of that letter that you wrote?
I don't feel prepared to comment on that. I have no idea. I don't know what they're doing in law enforcement. The Fusion Center hasn't adequately communicated with firefighters and paramedics regarding these issues. through back channels, you talk about back channels. Through back channels, we had heard that a few raids had been called off. We hear that they've been looking at this for several months or several weeks, depending on who you're listening to. So there's all kinds of things that we're hearing. But again, who knows?
Right.
It's certainly coincidental, isn't it?
Yeah. The fact that the raid is now behind you, are your concerns allayed, or are you still?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, not at all. In fact, we're hearing of it over further to the northwest now. And we're hearing that it's not as isolated as we had previously thought that it was. Right. So no, it's actually the complete opposite. We're now even more concerned.
Are you hearing more from City Manager Eric Walsh's office since the letter was made public? No. Okay. How about SAPD?
No. Well, not in an official capacity. No.
Okay. All right.
It's I feel like it. Greg, it feels like it's a dangerous subject, and it feels like nobody wants to be on the record about it. It feels like one of those things that has been.
Why do you think that is? Is it because the one news outlet reported that this started with kind of an intelligence operation from SAPD within the Migrant Resource Center. Is that it? Is that why you think?
Well, I think that there's
a lot of sensitivity about this on the city's part.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of sensitivity. We don't want to appear, xenophobic. We don't want to appear judgmental, but we have a transnational, what's been identified as a terrorist organization, right? Operating in San Antonio, Texas, the 7th largest city in the nation. That's concerning. That's concerning for the community. It's concerning for, obviously, law enforcement. And it's certainly concerning for firefighters and paramedics who are out there serving the community dutifully and faithfully. And let me tell you, so if the badge was on instead of union wear, I'm not safety first. That's not the way we roll. We're not safety first. Right. We're mission first. So if you're in need or you're in need, or Monty's in need, we're coming because we're mission first. But when they're not effectively communicating to our firefighters and paramedics, hey, you need to be aware, right? You need to have your head on a swivel. You need to watch your back. You need to look out for each other. 2 in, 2 out. If somebody's going back for tools or stretchers or whatever, heart monitor, send 2, just in case. Because about 15 years ago, I guess, SAPD changed their uniforms. They used to have a very distinct uniform. Do you remember that, Greg?
I do.
Yeah, they used to have a very distinct uniform, and you could identify a San Antonio police officer from a long way off. Right. Now they look just like us, so we look just, exactly alike unless you know the differences of the patches on the sleeve. A lot of people don't, It seems like these folks that we're talking about are new to the area, new to the country. And, it felt, I use the word underwhelming a lot, but there's a lot of underwhelming things going on in the San Antonio Fire Department right now.
Right. This is related, but way more political. So voters on November 5th are going to be going to the polls and voting on
Super Tuesday.
Among other things. They've got at the very bottom of their ballot, they're going to find 6 city charter amendments to vote on. One of them is Prop C, which would repeal the salary and term limit or term caps on the city manager that your union fought for and got in 2018.
Yep.
And we understand that the union, there was a lot of many questions after you kind of successfully concluded what appears to be a pretty, well-liked, at least in the fire union, well-regarded contract with the city. There was a lot of question about whether you would maybe even come out in support of Prop C. We now know that's definitely not the case. Tell us what your position is.
So as you know now,
right?
A press release was issued at 10 o'clock this morning by the San Antonio Professional Firefighters Association, taking an official stance on Proposition C, and we are against Proposition C.
Right.
And, to the contract process, we see it as 2 different issues. We really do. We always have. And in my mind, and having worked with Eric as long as I've worked with Eric, I've worked with him for a long time. I can't imagine that he saw it as a tit for tat or hey, scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. And I can't imagine that. He's too much of a professional for that. I don't see city management trying to use a contract as a political, apparatus to get us to do something on Prop C, and I think Prop C is much bigger than that. I think it's much deeper than that. I will say, however, that for our executive board who talked to our firefighters and paramedics like ad nauseum, they were out there talking, listening to concerns. What do you think, we should weigh in on this? Do you think we should weigh in on this? Should we just let it ride? What do you think we should do? And our firefighters and paramedics, we have financial equity in, what's now being called Proposition C, which is actually for us, the city charter, right? That city charter amendment back in 2018, we have financial equity in it, and we actually have what we call sweat equity in it. Our firefighters were working the polls, they were knocking on doors. They extended a big effort to get that across, the table, and part of that was, term limits and a balance of power, and of course the salary boundaries. We've already seen the salary boundaries have a positive impact for city employees because city employees have been getting very healthy pay increases for the last 4 years, 5 years, and we don't think it's coincidental.
Yeah. So I mean, the salary cap on the city managers is the city manager of San Antonio can be paid no more than 10 times the lowest paid full-time city employee. So that's what you're referring to.
And right now that's $18 an hour, the lowest employee's wage.
So you think that city employees have been getting healthy raises over the past few years because the city manager's salary is tied?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes, I do. Sure. I mean, it makes sense, right? If Eric's to get a pay increase, which he deserves, he's hardworking. I mean, I know how busy I am, and I can imagine perhaps how busy y'all must be, all the stories you got to cover, I can't even fathom how busy he is. Does he deserve a pay increase? Yeah, absolutely. But to do that, you're right. And I don't really consider it a salary cap because he's not capped, but it is a boundary. There's a lower boundary and an upper boundary. So I look at it as a boundary, not so much as a cap. That's just my perspective. But having been downtown and having to, be in the teams that had civilian employees, I'm also party to the process. The employee performance evaluations, or what we call EPEs within the city of San Antonio, and the bell curve, the antiquated bell curve that they use for pay increases and everything on the civilian side. And I can tell you, San Antonio civilians were not getting good pay increases, and now they are. And that's important from a labor perspective, right? Because we are still a labor union. Yes, we're a public safety labor union, but we're still a labor union. So we like to see that beneficial process. And in deliberations with our executive board, some of those members weren't convinced that the healthy way that our contract was arrived at, if you want to call it that, or the more expeditious version, which I still can't figure out why it takes so long to negotiate a contract, right? But they're convinced that is actually a result of the city charter amendment of 2018. Because what term limits do is term limits keep everybody accountable, right? The mayor's term limited, city council's term limited, the president of the United States is term limited, right? But our city charter was written over 70 years ago. Does it have a date on that thing?
Mid-50s.
Mid-50s, thank you.
Mid-1950s,
so,
somewhere in there.
So I'm not going to math it, but somewhere 70 years plus minus, right?
Right.
Back 70 years ago, a lot has changed in 7 decades, and if we're going to stay relevant as a city, we need to evolve. And people have always tried to knock San Antonio for the level of sophistication. They used to say 20 years ago, maybe around the time that you arrived, that we had an Austin complex. You guys remember that term?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Austin complex.
See,
I think we still hear that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we still have that Austin.
Do we still have an Austin complex?
I think we still do.
You just can't win, right? But a lot of that tracks back to this sophistication factor, where, maybe 70 years ago, we absolutely needed that, kind of all-powerful, mighty city manager, the professional that does this on day in, day out, But now we're starting to see, a transition, an evolution where we expect our elected representatives to represent what we want. That's why we vote for them, and then actually run the city accordingly. So I think we're seeing that kind of that migration, if you will, evolution, if you will. And I think that that's important because now you have a balance of power because of term limits. And firefighters and paramedics believed in term limits so much that shortly after I was elected, and if you know anything about unions, you got to move heaven and earth to modify and update those bylaws. It hadn't been done in over 20 years for us. And we got it done, term limiting my position within the union. So I'm term limited.
To how many years?
So it's 3 3-year terms for us. So a total of 9 years. That's how much we believed in term limits, because we've also witnessed what happens when people overstay their welcome. I'm not saying this says, because this is principle and not personal, this is not stating anything about somebody in particular, but we saw the previous fire chief overstay his welcome by about a decade, depending on what your knowledge and awareness with the fire department and internal operations are. Right. We saw that from my predecessor, absolutely overstayed his welcome.
Chris Steele.
Yes, overstayed his welcome, which is why we moved to term limit the position to ensure that never happens again. Mm-hmm. So, you have factors like that. All of these things were discussed with our executive board, and our executive board are the elected representatives of all 1,800 firefighters and paramedics. So, and that was only after comprehensive conversations were had.
Did you all face pressure from either inside City Hall or outside City Hall to either support Prop A or to just stay out of the charter amendment election completely?
Prop A or Prop C?
Prop C.
Prop C. Oh yeah, absolutely. There were a lot of conversations had. There are a lot of people. Everybody likes Eric. He's charismatic. He's funny. He's engaging. He's intelligent. He's good at what he does. On our side, we look at it, and this is something that I inherited. Right, we inherited it because our entire leadership teams have been swapped out now. We're on a healthy trajectory. We've rebuilt healthy relationships. And that's been a very intentional process, and it's been over the course of years now. Right, we're almost 3 years into the new leadership team. But we also, within our subculture, we look heavily towards the military and industry for leadership examples. And you see, leadership, whatever experts coming in, and they were special operations, or they were general or an admiral or whatever they were, or they were, industry, tycoons or, dynamos or leaders or whatever. And what you see constant transitions. The military model, you're staying in place, even if you're absolutely fantastic at your job, you're staying in place for 2, 3, 4 years, and then they're sending you to a different base to do a different job. And there's a lot of benefits in that model, and that's something we've seen absolute stagnation to the point where it's not even stagnated in the San Antonio Fire Department now. We're actually in a steady state of decline. So term limits exist for a reason. Firefighters and paramedics, at the end of the day, E-Board voted unanimously to go against Proposition C.
So you were hearing from supporters of Prop C. They were urging you to.
I heard from both sides. Both sides. We were hearing. Well, we were getting from all sides.
I'm interested in the supporters of Prop C. Any from within City Hall? Anybody from city administration?
City Hall's a big building, Greg.
It's not that big.
Are we talking about?
It's kind of a small world over there.
Well, the world's small. The building's big. Are we talking about elected officials? Or are we talking about?
I'm talking about both elected officials and city staffers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been conversations had. I leave most of that for the legislative team that we have.
Right. Were these conversations had at the same time you were negotiating a contract with the city?
No, not really.
So it was after, or?
As I recall.
Okay.
Yeah, as I recall, like we thought that there was going to be like, okay, once we get this contract across the line, mm-hmm. then there's going to be this period where we're like, okay, we can catch our breath now, because we've been in a very steady state of hyperspace and overwork on our side, rebuilding the union. Rebuilding the union is not easy. We didn't even have internal operating procedures and standards, and none of that existed before our leadership team. So we really had to start from scratch rebuilding Humpty, right? Putting Humpty back together again. So we were focused, right? And then we thought, okay, well, if we can get this contract and at least get a stabilizing contract for the firefighters and paramedics, and everybody's like, oh, the firefighters and paramedics love the contract. No, they really didn't, but they knew that it was a stabilizing contract moving into the next contract cycle. They knew because they trusted their team that, hey, look, this is what we need to get us to the next contract.
97% support it's a pretty good indication that they were at least kind of happy with it. Right.
Well,
like what were the deficiencies?
It's mostly wages.
Right.
Yeah,
but it wasn't
what they weren't happy with, because
or, even like just 90% support. You had 97% support.
So my phone constantly goes off, which is why it's completely on silent, like not even vibrate right now, because it goes off constantly. And I hear
Hold on, you didn't put it on airplane mode?
Yeah. Sorry. If it's messing with it.
Go ahead.
But the reality is a lot of the firefighters and paramedics were like, okay, I'm going to vote for this contract but I still think we should have got more. And that's what I mean. I'm not saying they're completely unhappy with it. They're not like, they're not completely unhappy with it. They're not like, walking out the door. When I say it's stabilizing, I believe the contract has stabilized the San Antonio Fire Department so that we can start repairing the department from within, hopefully to further stabilize it and get us to that next contract where we can further provide stability for our members and restore us as a competitive department as far as wages on the state level. We'll probably never compete on the national level because like up the seaboards, they really respect their firefighters. They pay them very well, but also the cost of living over there is, substantially higher than it is here in San Antonio. We recognize all these issues, but on the contract, specifically what I'm saying is, did they approve it? Absolutely. 97%, that's a big number. You're absolutely right. What I'm saying is I got a lot of, I'm going to vote for it, but I think we should have done better on wages. Here's kind of a compliment, not really a compliment, and then boom, here's a smack in the face. You should have done better. Sorry.
You guys ended up getting a contract, a 3-year contract that comes with a 20% raise over that contract length. Do you think you all could have ended up with more if you had kind of kept negotiations going? No,
I don't. I think the city had 20 in mind. And I don't think the city was going to move off of 20. I don't feel like they were going to move off of 20. And then, what is it, Project Marvel? You start to hear these rumors about Project Marvel, and then you hear about,
a little more than a rumor,
the mission. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, back then it was, back then it was like, it was rumors, right? Because it was like, oh, what is Project Marvel? Are you
Why does it have such a dumb name?
Code named it? Like, get out of here. You got to be kidding me. It has a code name. Like, we're launching SEAL Team 6 now? Oh my goodness. And then you hear about, we heard about it afterwards, the missions ballpark, which has been talked about for a long time. But the way they went about it did that feel transparent? I'm curious, did that feel transparent to y'all?
No.
Didn't feel transparent to me either. And neither does Project Mayhem or Marvel. I'm thinking Fight Club now, right? Nobody talks about Fight Club. First rule of Fight Club. Nobody, Project Marvel, Nobody talks about Project Marvel because they're all locked up in, non-disclosure agreements. And when you're having contractors and consultants, first thing to even get on the phone with you has to sign an NDA. That doesn't feel transparent to me. That doesn't feel very democratic. That feels very authoritarian. That's kind of, that makes me nervous. I don't know about y'all, but that's a big price tag. And I live in San Antonio.
Right.
So
I'd like to go back in time a little bit.
Back in time. All right.
To the colossal fight the fire union had with city manager Cheryl Scully.
That was ugly.
Ugly, yeah.
Cheryl.
And there she is.
There she is.
Which, kind of culminated in the fire union's effort to change the city charter in exactly the ways we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And including arbitration and arbitration clause. And you were talking about, the value you put in term limits because it kind of keeps organizations on their toes, fresh, and that without those, you had a president, Chris Steele, who overstayed his welcome. He also engaged in some very public and very ugly fights with Cheryl Scully.
He did, yes.
What was your position on the city charter amendments back in 2018, personally? Not any kind of union position, your own thoughts on the matter.
Personally, I believe in term limits. Yeah. I really do, Greg. I believe in the constant turnover. Right. I believe in fresh ideas. I believe in innovation. I believe in evolution, because without that, we're not going to stay relevant. I don't like when, I believe in succession planning, but if you're planning for a healthy model of succession planning, then you're preparing them, and anybody should be able to step out and anybody else can be plugged in and the system keeps rolling. That's the way it's supposed to work, right? And I don't live in a utopian society, right? I get it. I get what reality is about and what it's like. But term limits have multiple, honest question. What is the average career span in a major metropolitan city for a city manager?
I'd say about, I actually knew this. It was 12 years.
Is it 12 years?
Somewhere in there.
Oh, so it's lengthy.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
By the way, that could be way off.
It could be way off. Well, so
I put the number out there. I don't stand behind it.
So within within the fire service, it's kind of understood that the major metro chiefs only last 4 to 5 years, and then it recycles and it turns over. Okay. And it's important to have that injection of life, because we see what happened in the San Antonio Fire Department. Not only did we stop improving, we stagnated for a long period, and then we started a very steady state of decline. So we're down here. Morale was terrible. Administration was terrible. Leadership, what leadership? It was, and I'm not exaggerating. And it's unfortunate. So, and that's what I compare it to. So I really do believe in term limits.
Right.
And I also believe that the ability to declare for binding arbitration to free up a logjam or a gridlock is important. And previously both sides had to agree to it.
So you supported it?
Yeah, I supported it.
Okay. Did you feel like, talking with Chris Steele, you got this very strong sense that he considered himself at war with the city manager? Did you see it that way?
That he was, or that we are?
Well, as the president of the union, what's the difference between him and the fire union? If the president of an organization feels like they're at war with a city manager, isn't the organization itself?
My predecessor was a very controversial person who stayed in office far too long through manipulation.
How long was he in office?
Right around 18 years, somewhere in that ballpark. And he stayed in office by manipulating and deceiving his firefighters and paramedics. And that is not a healthy model.
How so?
Being disingenuous to them when communicating information, political theater, parlor tricks to stay elected. It was a really unhealthy environment. And I was the chief, full disclosure, I was chief of training from 2011 to 2014. And, I used to have, I don't want to call them heart-to-heart talks, but for lack of a better term, right, heart-to-heart talks with the cadets, to try and prepare them for what reality in the field really is like. And, I would tell them, I want this to resonate with you. I want you to continuously ask yourself, if not me, then who, right? So I looked around in 2021 and I was like, this is a mess. I knew what a mess administration was. It was horrendous. But I also knew how bad Local 624 had gotten under my predecessor's mismanagement. And if not me, then who, right? And I actually had a lot of my cadets reaching out to me, hey, if not you, then who, right? And I would fire right back, you can run too, So it was necessary. The change was necessary because his combative nature, his constant political theater, it led us to the crisis that we were in 21, 22, 23. And it remains to be seen if this contract can truly stabilize us on the economic side enough to, provide time for new leadership to come in and make the necessary and appropriate changes to get us back where we deserve to be. We've been surviving because our boots on the ground are very committed to the oath that they took to the San Antonio community.
Is part of the crisis that you saw before running and then, after being elected, did it start with going to binding arbitration and getting a contract that wasn't really satisfactory to the union? And that was an outgrowth of a city charter election that your union forced.
Crazy, right?
Right.
Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, but is that it? Like, when you say there was a crisis, was that part of it?
I think it definitely fed into it because that's what ultimately gave us that 20% pay cut over 10 years. It was my predecessor and his leadership team that kept us in Evergreen all those years. And he convinced firefighters and paramedics that it was absolutely necessary because of this and because of that. And it, you get really down into the weeds and you realize it really wasn't necessary. None of that was necessary. As I think that we've proven, Eric, myself, and Maria, and both of our teams have been able to demonstrate conclusively that there's a better way of doing business. And we have done that, and just complete and total transparency. The only complicating factor in our conversation was the potential impact to Eric Walsh, because we like and respect Eric that much. That was the only complicating factor for us. But at the end of the day, what prevailed was it's principle, it's not personal. And we even had members bring up, hey, Eric applied for the job and, competitive, interviews, and, Maria was the number 2 ultimately at the end of the day. And, he really worked hard to get that job, and he knew that it was term limited, and he knew that there were salary boundaries on it when he applied. And that helped me really kind of embrace, I already didn't think Eric would take it personally. He's too much of a professional to take it personally. But that helped me embrace even further. That actually makes sense to me. He did apply. He knew about the term limits. He knew about the salary boundaries. So he knew what he was coming into. So that actually resonated with me as we were, taking this very long odyssey, to finally arrive at our conclusion.
What will your campaign against Prop C look like this election season?
That's a good question. Probably yard signs. Well, we know that 4x8 signs. Kind of conventional stuff. I'll tell you, I'm not real good at negativity stuff. That's not my style. It's never been my style. I'll tell the truth, and sometimes the truth hurts people. But there's ways to tell the truth. So I don't see a lot of negative campaigning coming from us. I don't see any negative campaigning coming from us. That's not our style. That's not who we are. It's not what we do. San Antonio firefighters and paramedics, we're always there to help. If you see a fire apparatus or an ambulance sitting there, we're there to help. Always, every single time. So I can't, mate that, our very ethos at the core of who we are with some kind of negative, detrimental, mudslinging, vicious campaign. We're not going to do that. We stand on principle, and we stand on, the science behind it. And honestly, we really don't have functional science behind it yet, because the term limits really haven't even kicked in. The salary boundaries, we've already talked about that and how it's actually benefiting city employees. But we haven't seen what potential impact, the amendment of 2018 has. And here we're already trying to change it 6 years later, and there's other factors to consider in there, obviously. But we also looked at the process. The process is supposed to be transparent. It's supposed to be equitable. It's supposed to be inclusive. And Mayor Nirenberg put together a process that was anything but that. Instead, Mayor Nirenberg appoints every single member of the Charter Review Commission, right? I think that's accurate. Mm-hmm. And then he proceeds to issue an edict from on high. You will overturn the amendment from 2018. Where was community involvement? Where were the conversations with us? Because the conversations with us, the only thing I ever heard was, I'm committed to overturning that. Right. Well, hold on. Let's pump the brakes, man. Maybe we extend term limits, or maybe we modify the salary boundary. Maybe there could have been conversations, but the way that it was done.
I would guess that Nirenberg would dispute how you characterize it.
Really? Okay.
I think so. I think he would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he would say, I appointed the Charter Review Commission and I gave them subject areas. Basically, look at these parts of the charter.
So he would debate that it was coming down.
Okay.
It felt like it. It felt like it.
It may have felt like it.
Especially because he told me he wanted it overturned.
But
he has been very open about how the fact that he would like.
Yeah. So he appoints all members of a commission and makes sure that it's well known what his opinion is. Okay, I can see
and
that. That's
by
fair.
Coincidence, they came to the same.
A lot of coincidence going on now, aren't there?
Yeah.
How much, though, with this campaign are you all willing to spend? I want to say the last time I looked at the Political Action Committee's bank account, there's close to $1 million in
Really?
there.
Wow. I have
if
no
my
idea.
numbers are correct. But there was
I leave that to the legislative impact committees.
You all are sitting on. So do you have a sense of how much?
No, we really don't. We really don't. We don't know what it looks like. It's like David versus Goliath, and I'm not trying to be melodramatic. It really is, because you have this special interest group and they're all very wealthy.
Is that Renew SA, that political action group?
Yeah. That's the one that has 4 very influential members of the community that we have respect for. I mean, we respect every one of them. But they're all very wealthy. They're all very influential, and they're out there talking $1 million. Wow. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And I don't think we're prepared to spend that kind of money. And that's why I say it's David versus Goliath.
But I mean, going back to 2018, the fire union's ability to kind of deploy volunteers, to get your members out into the community and campaigning. was pretty valuable. I mean, it was probably more so than whatever the union wound up spending. You could do the same thing in this election.
Maybe.
Getting firefighters out in the community campaigning for this. Is that what's going to happen?
Probably, if I had to guess, because we don't have $1 million to spend on just one issue, one item. You said that there's how much in the pack? I don't know. How much is in our pack?
$1 million.
And that's from
over
the
900,000,
Okay,
yeah.
over 900,000. I didn't know that. So, that's good news. Thank you. It's good to know that our PAC committee has done well. It's good to know that our firefighters support our PAC and legislative committee. I look at it and I can't put a price tag on it, honestly, because I don't know. I don't know if we would have to ramp up signs. I don't know if we would have to print T-shirts. I don't know if we would have to, hey, block walkers, and then that costs us union time or union leave. I don't know. I honestly don't know what it looks like because I haven't done anything like this. Our leadership team hasn't done anything like this because we've been so busy trying to get a contract across the line, trying to rebuild healthy relationships, trying to, get back, regain the respect of our community, the elected officials, the influential individuals in the community who, help make decisions sometimes. That's what we've been focused on. We haven't run a referendum. We haven't, defended a proposition. We haven't run a proposition. So I legitimately have no idea, which is why I'm so happy that we have a legislative team and a PAC team to work on that stuff.
Yeah. You've been really giving it your time. I appreciate it. Thanks. We've got one more question for you, and then you're done here.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good.
Go for it.
Well, I want to ask you about the search for a new fire chief. The department has been without a permanent leader since Chief Hood retired in early January. He was facing possible termination. What are you all looking for in terms of a new chief? Are you open to an external candidate or an internal candidate? And kind of what's the status of the search right now?
Yeah, I'll save this for last on purpose. Molly, you love putting me on the X, don't you? Like, oh, here's the X, stand right there. Good question. Obviously, it's one of the big questions of the day for us. There are multiple factors that we have to take into consideration when we start talking about a fire chief. And a lot of that has to do with where we're coming from. We're coming from a situation where internally there have been so many perversions of healthy leadership within the San Antonio Fire Department that we've witnessed, multiple EEOC lawsuits and complaints. We've seen a lack of appropriate accountability to administrators who are acting or behaving poorly, to include the former fire chief. And that has led us into the current crisis, right? We have a command crisis right now. So without going like super deep, because that could be its own session. It really could be its own podcast. And I'm not like throwing bait out there. It's just, that's how deep that goes, especially when you know all the nuances and you know all the intricacies. So you look at, are we open to a suitcase chief or do we want a native chief? And those are the terms that we use, right? Suitcase chief, obviously is somebody coming in from out of town, wherever that may be. It's anywhere not SAFD, right? And then of course a native chief is one of us that already wears the uniform. And there's problems and there's advantages with both of them. One of the biggest issues that the inbound chief, whoever they may be, has to deal with is the current state of affairs, right? How did we get here? Why are we here? How can we, fix this? How can we get out of this? How can we build past this, evolve, reform, whatever we need? And to do that, you really have to have an institutional knowledge that only a native chief can have. Because you bring in a suitcase chief. The former fire chief was a suitcase chief. And he brought, I always say, and I'm not, people think it's a joke. It's really not a joke. I always say that he overstayed his welcome by about a decade. Had he left 10 years prior, he probably would have went down as one of the best fire chiefs in history. But he got comfortable. He became excessively complacent. He allowed some very bad actors to fail upward in our organization. And that led to and culminated in what we see transpiring now, where our 1 and 2 are gone. Some people call it quiet fired, like you mentioned, he might have gotten fired. No, he was going to get fired, and he chose to retire. So you look at where we're at and you say, well, all the intricacies and all the institutional knowledge you have, it has to be a native chief. And if it's a native chief, then who? Because the candidates are all members of his staff that he picked, he appointed, he chose, hand selected. There's 6 assistant chiefs and 3 deputy chiefs for us, right? For a total of 9. And all 9 of them were hand selected by our former fire chief. So, I'll leave that for y'all to read into. But with a suitcase chief, not only do they bring suitcase problems, familiarity, now there are some similarities, putting water on fire, everybody tries to reduce it to its, very common denominator. Oh, you're just putting water on fire, or you're just, bandaging a wound or whatever. It's not that simple, but there is some carryover between organizations. And I think the real question is can a suitcase chief with suitcase problems come into San Antonio with its robust set of challenges right now and effectively lead us out of this mess? And I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I can sympathize with Eric and Maria on how complicated this decision is going to be. But something that we as firefighters and paramedics are having issue with is the process is already compromised. You have my predecessor who is now confirmed for having conducted illegal behaviors on a protected candidate, right? And has potentially impacted the outcome. But we don't know who my predecessor was acting on behalf of. And it's not very legitimate to say, it was lone wolf.
Yeah.
You can't really sit there and say, it was a lone wolf behavior. Why would somebody just lone wolf it and I'm going to go tinker with this process down here to try and affect the outcome? Is acting on behalf of somebody, or at least that's what firefighters and paramedics believe. And until we really know what's going on with that, I'm not sure that we can, really make a healthy decision, because it could be anybody, because as a union president, people from across the spectrum, right? Across the nation, people from everywhere. When you go to convention, you're sitting there with firefighters from every single state, most jurisdictions. A lot of people, right? So he could be acting on behalf of a native or a suitcase.
Right. By the way, just for listeners' sake, Chris Steele was arrested and accused of basically harassing a potential candidate, correct? Mm-hmm. We don't know who that person is, as you noted. But yeah, it got really weird and very illegal and very ugly. Is there any, is the influence of Chris Steele, how strong is it still in the union, generally speaking?
I would say it's not in the union, but the reality is
so he doesn't have anybody who's going to pick up his work for him.
I don't think so. There are still individuals that probably agree with a lot of, theatrics and whatever you want to call whatever my predecessor did, right? There are probably some people within our 1,800 members that are still approving, still side with that, still think that's the way, right? But as far as our executive board and our elected officials, that's not the mindset. The mindset has migrated and evolved well past that. Okay.
All right. That sounds like a good place to leave it today. So,
perfect. Sounds good.
Joe Jones,
Off
thank
the hot
you.
seat.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for watching and listening. Do not forget to sign up for our ENside Politics newsletter. You can find it in the show notes on the YouTube channel. Thanks a lot, and we will see you next week.